Oh, hello. Welcome. Welcome once again to Denton's Tales. Now, this time, I'd like to talk about a very divisive subject. Yes, extremely divisive. In fact, there is nothing more divisive in Norse history / mythology than the Skjaldmaer or the Shieldmaidens. Yes, they are a very divisive subject indeed, with some, of course, vigorously claiming, well, but they did exist. Yes, they did exist. Well, many others equally vigorously claim they didn't. Well, warriors, the Vikings, preposterous, ridiculous poppycock. Never heard such rubbish in all my life. So, what is the truth? Well, my view is that they did exist. Something that I think this video will demonstrate quite clearly. So hold your judgment till the end. Watch the video right through, and then you decide. But whatever the truth might be, it's nothing like the Hollywood idea as seen in TV shows like Vikings or Vikings Valhalla. Oh, no, not that very long way indeed. Regiments of women, whole regiments of them, all carrying identical shields, marching off to war with the banners flapping in the breeze and drums beating. They're in every shield wall on both sides in every battle. And I mean, that is utterly ridiculous. It's complete rubbish. And anybody who thinks it makes sense, well, they're not making very much sense themselves. But, you see, there is a but. Female warriors did exist among the Old Norse, yes, and in many other parts of the world as well, as we shall see. So, let us go to the actual facts of the matter, such as they are. Around the year 1200 AD, the historian Saxo Grammaticus, writing in his Gesta Danorum, the history of the Danes, wrote this, and I quote, "There were once women in Denmark who dressed themselves to look like men, and spent almost every minute cultivating soldier skills. Oh, they courted military expertise so earnestly that anyone could have guessed that they had unsexed themselves. Those especially who had forceful personalities, who were tall and elegant, tended to embark on this way of life. They put toughness before allure, aimed at conflict instead of kisses, and desired not the couch, but the kill. And those they could have appeased with looks, they attacked with lances." Yes. Now, this is a very telling bit of evidence, because, you see, Saxo, well, he wasn't a feminist by a very long way. Oh, no. He didn't approve of women in combat, not at all. He said they should confine themselves to proper female things, like working a loom rather than a lance. He was very misogynistic, you see. Women should stick to making babies and cooking and all that sort of thing that they were eminently suited for. So he would hardly praise their warlike skills in such glowing terms, would he? Rather, were he to mention it at all, he would have said, how useless they were, incompetent and vastly inferior, of course, to the men. Their pathetic attempts to emulate the men simply proving how inferior they really were, you see. He would have said they couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. Well, of course, they didn't have paper bags back then, wet or otherwise, but you know what I mean. He would hardly have praised them in glowing terms when he didn't like them in the first place. But see, he didn't do that. No, he was highly complimentary, and not only did he give a glowing account of that group of female warriors, while condemning them, of course, as unwomanly and better suited to women's things, but he heaps praise on another group of female combatants, writing an account of the Battle of Bravalla in 750 AD, and I quote again, "Now out of the town, under the captains Hether and Visner, with Håkon Cutcheek, came Tumi the sailmaker. On these captains, who had the bodies of women, nature bestowed the souls of men. Viborg also was inspired with the same spirit and was attended by Bo Bramson and Brat the Duke, thirsting for war. Unquote. A woman named Hedborg is also mentioned. Viborg was credited with killing the champion Swedish warrior. Yes, Soti. A mere woman killing the champion warrior. How about that then? Before being killed herself. And Visna of the Slavs was said to have had her arm cut off while carrying the Danish banner. Once again, giving a glowing account of feminine fighting prowess. And there seems no reason at all for Saxo to have invented any of that. I mean, why invent a story to praise something he didn't like? Historians are divided, actually, on the Battle of Bravalla. Was it a genuine historical event, or was it a romantic, fictionalized story? Yes, you see, yes, say the skeptics. It's fiction, you see, a myth, a mere fairy tale doesn't prove a thing. No, those women who just made up fictional characters. What does that prove? Nothing at all. You're going to believe that. Well, you're going to believe in Snow White and, Red Riding Hood. But no, you see, think about it. Even if they were fictional characters, that doesn't really matter at all. Even if the battle never happened, why would the misogynistic Saxo invent yet more great female warriors? I mean, he'd already heaped one group of military women with incredible praise, who probably did actually exist. Why invent another one that wasn't even real and make them out as great warriors as well? That makes no sense at all. Now, he was writing, of course, 200 years after the Viking Age, but he is the closest source that we have to those times, and he would have had access to the various word-of-mouth stories handed down by the skalds, or just people telling each other stories on a slow Saturday night. But what is very interesting in his works, and in the sagas, of course, is the concept of women warriors. A concept that was, accepted in a very male-dominated society. While decrying the idea of warrior women, Saxo was perfectly happy with the concept of it. I'll have more to say about that in a moment. If you dislike something that exists, but, you don't praise it, and you certainly don't invent the same thing that doesn't exist and then praise that too, that is not something that's going to happen. Yes, I think Shieldmaidens existed, though that term is found only once, I think it is, in the sagas. Women are simply referred to as taking part in combat, and there's no fancy title used for that. The number of women mentioned in combat in the sagas, and Hervor and her daughter of the same name, Oslug, Freydis, Erikstatir, Gudrun, Viborg, and so on, that's a clear indication that the concept of warrior women was accepted. And these women are never mentioned as being incompetent or cowardly. They're never shown to be inferior to the men, far from it. Something that one might have expected in stories created in very male-dominated society. That point is always overlooked, and it amazes me how people don't seem to see it. The concept is very important. You see, if women never, and indeed couldn't, do those things, it's highly unlikely they would be mentioned so frequently as doing them, and doing them very well indeed, doing them just as well as the men, sometimes even better. Oh, yes. Hervor is shown as braver than any of her male crew. You see, she goes ashore on the haunted island, while the big, strong, macho men, they all stay on the ship. Bunch of wimps, the whole lot of them. And Freydis picks up a sword to fight, charging at the enemy, screaming, and 8 months pregnant at the time, with one of her breasts flapping up and down as she does it. After the mighty Viking men, they've all run away. So here we have, again, a woman shown as being a lot braver than the men. No, that was not going to happen in macho-based storytelling unless it happened in fact. The Amazons of Greek myth were great warriors. Oh, yeah, they were fantastic warriors. They were amazing, but they were always defeated by men in the end. Yes, because the Greeks could not even contemplate the idea of women being superior to men. I ask you, women, not just equal to men, but maybe even better at something. You couldn't have that going on now, could you? That is not the case in the Norse sagas, where the women can fight just as well as the men. They are not defeated by the men as a matter of routine, as were the Amazons. And the accepted concept of female warriors is so obvious, to me at least. of course, I, unlike some others who will not be mentioned, listen with an open mind and actually use my brain. Yes. If it never happened, couldn't happen, wouldn't be allowed to happen, well, it wouldn't be mentioned the way it is in the sagas. Now, women, of course, have fought in wars since the dawn of recorded history, though men have tended to very conveniently overlook that fact when they felt it somehow reduced their own manliness. But that's, of course, completely ridiculous. But those women, you see, tended to do so as individuals rather than in military formations. There were female military units as well as individual warriors in some countries, to be sure, yes. The forces of both Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan included female warriors. And in fact, and I find this quite fascinating, the strongest warrior in Kublai's army, according to Marco Polo, and we ought to know it was there, undefeated against numerous men, even in wrestling, was a woman, the niece of the Khan. I think that's quite interesting. Some rulers in India had female bodyguards, not unlike those in the Black Panther movie. The African kingdom of Dahomey had a full regiment of women, yes, a whole regiment of them, who would later put up a heroic, though eventually rather futile, resistance to the French colonial forces, armed with modern weapons, their spears and antiquated muskets, no match for rifles and artillery. Pointy sticks don't get you very far when you're facing a gun. And there were female samurai in Japan. I'm sure that's a surprise to quite a lot of people. In fact, one of the greatest samurai warriors was a woman. I'm sure that surprised quite a few of you. She was famed for her strength and her courage, Tomoe Gozen. The Prophet Muhammad was guarded by a female warrior in battle. And Saxo, of course, confirms that some women in Denmark did form themselves into military groups. We know there were female warriors among the Celts of Ireland. There were the Turang sisters in Vietnam, and of course let's not forget Joan of Arc. And, well, I think Boadicea did rather well. Yes, I'm sure the Romans would have agreed. At least those who were still alive after she passed by. So plenty of women did fight in ancient times. But, you see, unlike Saxo's Danish women or the regiment of Dahomey, most women who went to war did so singly or maybe in small groups, and usually in response to a developing need, taking up arms if the need arose, perhaps, defending a village if the men were away fighting or trading or raiding or whatever they were doing somewhere else, and often fighting alongside the men, as we see in the Norse sagas. Archaeology has shown us evidence of female warriors, such as the very well-known grave at Birka, situated adjacent to the garrison, containing a body buried with a sword, an axe, a spear, a sax, two shields, armor-piercing arrows, and take note of that, armor-piercing arrows, and 2 horses. Now, that was a classic Viking warrior grave, it was thought when it was discovered, because graves, you see, were sexed by the contents. Weapons, a sword. Well, of course, obviously that was a man. It was buried with a sword. You wouldn't have a woman with that. Jewellery, mirrors, Oh, yes, well, that meant a woman. If you wouldn't bury a man with a mirror so he could admire his lovely beard, would you? But DNA, you see, DNA later showed the remains were actually those of a woman. Military weapons, not hunting ones. No woman went hunting a wild boar with a sword and shield, well, at least none who wanted to come back alive. Nor did she use armor-piercing arrows when hunting. Only a warrior would have or need that sort of thing. But wild animals that she might go out hunting, well, they're very unlikely to be wearing suits of armor or chainmail, were they? Other graves have been found of women buried with military weapons. Weapons useless, as I've said, to a hunter. Some 30 female graves, in fact, have been found containing weapons. There's actually a skull on display in the Oslo Museum, that of a woman who had suffered an injury to her forehead, a depressional fracture, probably what killed her. And knives, an axe, and a sword found in her grave are displayed with her. And she has been officially accepted as a warrior. Yes. People People, of course, have made ridiculous suggestions as to these female graves. In the case of the Birka grave, for example, it was suggested, you see, that her husband was a great warrior. Oh, yes, a mighty warrior. And she was buried with his weapons as a tribute to him. He having, well, presumably died elsewhere. Now, why he hadn't taken his weapons with him might be asked. But, you know, to see how absurd that idea is, what you do, you reverse it. Oh, Olaf was such a mighty warrior. How shall we honour him? His wife is a famous dressmaker. Let us bury a roll of cloth and a sewing kit with him. Ah, excellent! What a fitting tribute for a mighty warrior and a powerful man. Bury him with a sewing kit and a roll of cloth. Yes, it sounds pretty silly when you put it that way, doesn't it? But more than the concept of women fighting being accepted, important as it is, the grave evidence or references in the sagas, there is some genuine historical proof that Norse women could take part fully in male activities, including killing one another. A Greek historian recorded how in 971 AD, Svatoslav I of Kiev, ruler of the Kievan Rus, the Vikings, of course, who had settled in what is now Russia and Ukraine, invaded Bulgaria, which is then part of the Byzantine Empire, bringing female warriors in his army. Indeed. During the siege of the city of Dorostelin, the Rus forces were reduced to near starvation, and a force of some 2,000 warriors, including women, made a surprise sally out during the night to search for supplies, and managed to defeat a Byzantine force on the way. After the eventual defeat of the Rus, the bodies of armed women were found among the fallen warriors. Now this is a historically, established fact. And I would consider that it on its own proves beyond question not only the acceptance of the concept, but also the reality of the Shieldmaidens, for want of a better term. Critics have claimed, oh yes, there are always critics. As a former actor, I detest critics. It has been said that those who can do, and those who can't, they become critics and tell other people who can do it how it should be done. But, enough of that. Yes, critics said, you see, no, the women were just wives of the soldiers. They were camp followers, prostitutes, just tagging along, and they got caught up in the fighting, grabbed weapons, and they joined in, you see. It's very unlikely, if you ask me, that they would. They'd have been much more likely to have crawled under a wagon and stayed there, I would have thought. But, I really think the Byzantines would have been able to tell the difference between, normal women in everyday clothing who may have grabbed weapons and armoured warriors who would have been, they'd have been dressed differently for a start. They'd have been wearing sword belts, for example, and armour that actually fitted them, rather than something far too big they just grabbed from a recently deceased man. There is also an Irish account of a Viking force led by a woman. Yes, led by a woman who they called the Red Maiden. Now, why would they invent a female Viking if she didn't exist? And a woman seemingly even more ferocious than the men. Again, why would the Irish try and make out that a woman might even be more ferocious than all the male Vikings they were having so much trouble with? I must go back to a point I made at the beginning of this video, that there are a great many provable, solid, historical accounts of females at war across the centuries, often very successfully, from the ancient Britons and the Irish Celts on down through the Middle Ages and later on, from times before the invention of firearms that could put men and women on an equal basis in combat, when it was swords and spears and axes that were used. And some of them in very male-dominated countries. Well, Japan, for example, with its very male code of Bushido, and yet we had female samurai. Or among the early Muslims, where no less than the Prophet Muhammad himself wrote of how he was guarded in battle by a woman, a ferocious warrior, of whom he said that wherever he looked, there she was, defending him. Graves of warrior women like the one at Birka have been found in other parts of the world, and there's a splendid Celtic breastplate. Oh, it's a magnificent thing. It was discovered in France, clearly made for a woman with twin projections for the breasts, and another one was found in India. In ancient Celtic Ireland, women were actually specifically trained as warriors for many years. Yes, until a law was passed forbidding the practice to continue. Possibly because the men didn't like the idea of their supreme masculinity being undermined, as it were. And that, you see, that is how we know that the warriors existed, because if they didn't have female warriors in the first place, well, they hardly needed a law not to have them being trained, did they? You know, you don't bring in a law to forbid something that isn't happening. That's just logic and common sense. And again, when did logic and common sense ever come into historical debates? Yes, I think we must accept that Norse women, some Norse women, that's important, you see. Some women did take part in combat. Well, of course, it wasn't the norm, obviously, but it did happen. There is far too much evidence, I think, for anyone to deny it. Historical and archaeological evidence, the numerous mentions of it in the sagas, plus the misogynist attitudes of Saxo, so much at odds with what he wrote about it. No attempt to diminish the fighting skill of the women, even though he thoroughly disapproved of them doing it. And that's not the way people write. So, while the Shieldmaidens depicted in television shows like Vikings or Vikings Valhalla, certainly not bastions of historical truth by a very long way, you know, every army full of female warriors was completely ridiculous. It was absolutely absurd. That some women did fight in combat under particular circumstances, I think we must accept. As the legal phrase is, proven beyond any reasonable doubt. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least you're still awake at the end of it. And if, as I said at the start, you have reached an opinion on the Shieldmaidens, yay or nay, I'd love to have your comments in the commenting section below. And I hope you'll join me in the next video. Now, by the way, the lovely thumbnail to this video was produced by my good friend Alice Goss, a wonderful travel and history blogger. Her channel is well worth a visit. I give a link below. Until the next time, I shall say farewell, goodbye for now, and hopefully see you in the next video. Or rather, well, you'll see me, but no, you know what I mean. See you then.